Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CoronaSphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, reporting to you from the plane of infinite despair here. Brush some Cheetos off of my survival suit. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing well. Going to try and keep things relatively simple again today. What we really want to talk about today is the idea of immunity, and not from a biological point of view, because very soon we're going to have to start dealing with immunity as a legal issue. And that means probably, given this climate, a political one as well. Damn Cheetos. Here's what I mean by that. There seems to be no evidence that I've seen that you will not get at least some sort of temporary immunity having recovered from the disease. The virus appears to be mutating actually very, very, very slowly. That's very good news. And then that means that if you come down with the disease, you develop the antibodies, you fight off the disease, depending on the severity, shouldn't really matter. You develop the antibodies, and basically from that point forward, it looks like you're immune. We're going to just leave that as a taken. It's not 100% proven, but we're just going to go from there just for the sake of this argument. So when everything got shut down, everything stopped at once. Everybody suddenly, within a period of a few days anyway, just stopped going to work. And when we talk about going back to work, no one certainly can possibly think that we don't go back to work until the last case is recorded. Well, first of all, that's just never going to happen. It's just going to be with us for a while. And so the reason that I think this needs to be talked about is because very quickly we're going to have to start dealing with the fact that people who have already come down with COVID-19 and then recovered, those people are biologically immune, and they can either catch it again or transmit it to others. So those people can go back to work now. Absolutely right now. They can be at work right this second. All of them can be at work right this second. And the corresponding good news to the bad news of watching this curve continue to climb is that as more and more cases develop, more and more people recover. And the ratio's one of the things that has just been debated from the beginning. But without question, it's 98% of the people who get it recover, and it's probably much higher than that. So every day that goes by, as more and more people get sick, and as we watch the cases increasing, and we watch the deaths increasing, and all the rest of this stuff, the number of people with acquired immunity from this disease increases every day. And as the disease continues to accelerate in terms of its exponential spread, the number of people with biological immunity spreads the same. The numbers of people who are immune should be something on the order of 100 times the number of people who die, roughly. So I'm not going to get into any stuff about herd immunity or anything like that. I'm not qualified to talk about that. But one thing that I do think is interesting is this. This premise seems perfectly reasonable to me. Don't see any reason why this would not be the case. So the question then becomes, if we all stopped going to work on the basis of the same legal order or public health advice or whatever, we're certainly not going to all go back to work at the same time. It's just clear. Some of us can go back to work right now. So this is where the problem is. When I say go back to work, I mean resume your life as it was basically before. If that is true, and it appears to be, then here comes the problem. How do you certify that somebody's immune? And this is going to be a problem, because the one thing we've seen from the very, very small number of people who are doing the hoarding and so on, and it's microscopic. I really let it bother me more than it should have the other day, but it's microscopic. But nevertheless, people will cheat. They're going to cheat. They're always going to cheat. There's always going to be cheaters in any system. So how do we handle this? I've been thinking about this from really from the beginning, and we should be getting close to the time where this should be like a number one issue, and that issue is how do we certify that somebody's immune in terms of legally, in terms of day to day operation. Again, we're just going to take it as read that there will be sufficient serology tests that'll show that you've recovered from COVID-19. You have the antibodies. We're not going to worry about that aspect of it. That's a supply problem right now. But if you if you take a serology test, you prove that you do have the antibodies, that you've recovered from COVID-19, you are immune, at least for several months, if not a year, at the minimum. Then how do we know that you're immune? Because you should be able to go about your business without fear of anything else. And it seems to me that if we're really committed to keeping the number of deaths down to a minimum, while trying to not crater the economy, we have to figure out a way to get people back to work as soon as they develop this immunity, and not a day later. Yeah, a lot of people are saying, well, let's put maybe we could wear a gold star sewn onto our clothes, or an armband, or maybe we could tattoo numbers on our forearm. You know, I don't know if that really helps the situation, to be honest with you, because this is not a situation, we're not talking about the inverse. We're not talking about you've proven positive, so therefore we're going to lock you up. We're talking about getting people back to business. We're talking about it's a freedom badge. It's not an isolation badge, or a sign of arrest or opprobrium or anything like that. Immunity is here. It's coming. More people become immune every day, and so we have to simply find a way to determine whether somebody's immune and whether they can go back to work. And people are saying in the comment section, I don't know if I want to go here. Uh, you know, I don't, I, I don't see the problem with this. I really don't. I think that we ought to be thinking very seriously about of what kind of verification would be, uh, let me think, relatively easy to accomplish, and relatively tamper proof. So I'm just checking again here. People are saying segregation. No, no. I mean, it's the opposite of segregation. This is the We're being segregated now. How many people can we get back to work quickly, and how do we know? Not how do we know? How do you prove it? What do you do? Is it something as simple as these nightclub bracelets that you have to cut off? It doesn't, needless to say, have to be very long lasting, I don't think. Or do you need any proof at all? Somewhere in here, we're gonna have to we're gonna have to decide what we're gonna do about this. Uh, I'm just checking something here. Okay, so look, people are saying, in fact, our respected expert is saying that coronaviruses don't usually confer long-lasting immunity. It doesn't have to be long-lasting immunity. It can be, when you say long-lasting, are we talking about 3 months, 4 months, a year? It doesn't have to be permanent immunity. That's what the vaccine is for. What I think the crisis is right now, the crisis is we have to get people back to work as quickly as possible. Everybody who can get back to work safely should get back to work. And some people who are on the margins, this can't go on forever. This economy cannot stay shut down. I'm trying to talk about ways to have our cake and eat it too. How can we continue to do everything we can to minimize the death rate, flatten the curve, all of that stuff, social quarantine, all of it. We're in it now, and I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence of the results, but it appears to be working. What what do we do about getting people back to work? Now, somebody here has said, no proof required, land of the free, right? Well, it's not the land of the free now. It's not the land of the free in California. It's not the land of the free in New York. It's not the land of the free anywhere. So that ship has sailed. It's not a question of whether or not we want to do that. It's done. It's been done for 2 weeks now. So how do we handle this? What kind of a mechanism is there? I have not seen that that people are being reinfected. I don't see particularly a lot of evidence that there's there doesn't seem to be a number of cases of people who have had the disease and then gotten it again. I've heard of one or two cases. Those seem to be outliers. So what are we going to do about that? Are we going to do anything? How are we going to get back to work? What's going to happen? How is it going to look? This is my entire point. There is the idea that there's going to come a point where the green light goes on and everybody goes back at the same time is logically faulty. It may be morally needed or required or whatever, but it's logically faulty. Everybody stopped because there's a crisis. Everybody got stopped going to work, at least in the states where these orders were in place. Now, does everybody go back at the same time? Do we have to wait until all the cases are gone? That's not going to happen. The cases are going to be here forever, as I said earlier. We have people right now who have immunity to this disease. If it's temporary in terms of months or a year or whatever, that's really irrelevant right now. What can we do to get those people out there, and how do we measure it? And how do we verify it? What do we do? I don't know. I'm just bringing it up, and I'm bringing it up because it seems to me, just watching the news as we go around, it seems to me that I am talking about things generally about 3 or 4 days before everybody else seems to. I don't take particular pleasure in that. It just seems to be the case. So what does this consist of? And is there a precedent? Is there anything currently like this in society now? Is there, I mean, even something like these medical alert IDs is a potential model. It's something. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that the idea that we should all have to wait until the last person is either developed immunity or until when does it stop, right? When does it stop? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to have the cake and eat it too. And to me, this seems self-evident. I mean, it seems self-evident. People are recovering from this disease on a daily basis in vastly larger numbers than people who are succumbing to it. What do we do? How long do we wait? It's absolutely true that you can get just as dead on the back end of a curve as you can on the front end. But where? What? Who decides? What happens? I'm not coming at you with answers. I'm coming at you with questions, because these are the kind of things we should be talking about. We should be talking about them now. When people say something like the date, and somebody just said May 1, okay, well, May 1 is May 1 for who? The rate in California, which is a lockdown state, and New York, which is a lockdown state, I think the last I heard was that the mortality rate in New York was something like 20 times California. The thing that nobody seems to be talking about is why. There's been a fair amount of speculation about, well, New Yorkers are more closely packed together. And I think the reason nobody's talking about why California's mortality rate is so remarkably below New York's and other large cities for that matter is because we drive cars. It's just that simple. And I think that given the desire on the part of so many elitist politicians to get rid of cars, they hate cars, the whole global warming thing, the whole emissions thing, the whole the whole Century 21, what is it? It's not Century 21, that's a real estate company. This entire idea of setting up these urban centers with mass transit, all of the progressives out, Agenda 21, thank you. Agenda 21 and all of the progressives hate automobiles. They hate them. And everything that is being done that can be done to make America hate automobiles is being done. And what you will never hear the news say, oh, California's doing well because people have been driving cars. So I'm just checking again here. We have a Lord Bios said that it stops when there are no more cases. Well, there's always going to be more cases, aren't there? I mean, what are we going to do about the economy? This is not a theoretical issue. It's not a mathematical issue. It's not a biological issue. This is not an experiment. Somewhere on this spectrum, somebody's going to have to make a decision, and the society's going to have to make a decision. At which point do we go back to work and take the casualties as a result of that? Where does that happen? Somebody's got to have that discussion. Somebody's got to be talking about that. It is the only question right now that's on the board. It's the only thing that really is that matters right now is when do we go back and how do we decide? And I don't hear anybody talking about this. All I hear is people saying, well, we're going to push this back and we're going to push that back. We're going to push this back. We're going to push that back. Look, this virus is going to probably be with us for a long, long, long time. It's going to get added into the number of things that are out there. Hopefully, it'll be something that can be included in the vaccinations, but it's not going to just disappear. So there are always going to be cases, and there may be many cases where you get reinfected. Who knows? But one way or another, we are going to have to decide that this is the point at which we are going to say, okay, we have done everything within our power, and anything beyond this is costing more than it's saving. And I don't know of anybody who's having any discussion of how that decision is going to be made and who's going to make it and why. And I'll tell you something else. If we don't have this conversation, I do not want to see this in the hands. Here's the trap. The president is being so recklessly blamed for this. They're starting a congressional inquiry while this is going on. So it's actually inhibiting his ability to really deal with this on a practical level, because no matter what he says, it's turned into genocidal madman. So I'll just say it. When are we going to make the decision that this is time to go back to work, and the degree that we've mitigated this is great? It's not yet. I'm not saying it's yet. I'm not saying we should start now. We're not even at the peak yet. But I simply don't see the sense in having more people every day being immune to this disease for some period of time while we're waiting for a vaccine. What if there's a serology test and you test positive for antibodies to COVID-19, you have temporary immunity, there are antibodies in your bloodstream, you had the disease, you've recovered from it. I don't know how long that's going to last, but for the time being, I'm not really too concerned about that. That number increases every day. And the number of people who are locked up who not only cannot get the disease but cannot give the disease, that number goes up every day. And for us to wait as a society and keep those people at home when they could be working right now in perfect safety for themselves and others is, to me, this is just nuts. And then that gives you the problem of, okay, so how do you prove it? How do you show it? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I just don't. But I do know that one of the things that we're absolutely seeing out there, and the California mortality rate is a great example of this. No one is talking about why clearly Los Angeles, second largest city in the country in terms of population, has a 20th of the mortality that New York City has. is because we drive automobiles. But the fact that that's not being mentioned, it's never, ever, ever mentioned, ever, is an indication of how politicized this is and how actual solutions are just simply being ignored. Forget, chloroquine, any of that stuff. Forget it. Just the fact that nobody will talk about the idea that no, cars are saving lives in California. That's why we're not getting massacred the way people are or are not in New York. It's because we drive cars. It's socially, politically unacceptable from the elites that make these decisions for us. When we look, there's been so much. What's the word? It's kind of a like an inflexibility. It's this kind of thing where it's like, well, this is my position by God, and we're going to ride this one no matter what. I think that anything that can be done to restore people's freedom of movement and freedom for economic activity and a social life and all the rest of it, I think the faster we make that happen, the better it's going to be for the country, for individuals, for all of us. And I don't see any way around this issue. So that's all I really wanted to talk about. I haven't gotten a whole lot of like helpful suggestions. Mostly got people saying, I'm not taking a mark. I'm not gonna. All right. Okay. That's fine. But every day, more and more people are capable of going back to work without harming themselves or other people. And every day that number gets bigger. And every day that those people stay home is a day that they could be contributing to the economy without consequence as far as the disease is concerned. And no one's talking about it. So that's it. I would like somebody just made a suggestion, and I think it's a good idea too. I would like to see some kind of evidence, some kind of numbers, something on what is the difference in the curve between complete social isolation and people basically wearing masks and sanitizing their hands every half hour. In other words, how much flatter does that curve get? If wearing a mask provides 80%, 90%, 50% of the ability to slow the spread of this disease, then that needs to be something that we're talking about. If everybody if you couldn't go out there, I'm talking about lockdown states because I'm in one of them. If you couldn't go out there or you couldn't go back to work unless you were wearing a mask, would that be as good as complete isolation? Clearly wouldn't be as good as total isolation, but would it be good enough? Would it be close enough? I just can't believe that the conversation seems to be constantly like whether we should go back to work or not. Of course we should go back to work. And we should go back to work as quickly as possible. So how do we decide? What do we do? What do we do about the immunity? What do we do about it? It's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating. These are frustrating days. Somebody, rational people, understand that this is the situation. This is a new disease. Its mortality is relatively low compared to some of these diseases that have just cut enormous swaths of the population down. Nobody wants to say it, but the fact of the matter is that virtually all of the people who are going to this disease are people who are in very bad shape, one way or another, either to advanced age or underlying conditions. I am the last person in the world who says that, well, too bad for them, they're old and they're sick. I am the last person in the world to say that. I really am. I find that whole you're old, go die thing now is just the absolute horrors of socialized medicine and all the other things that I'm deadly opposed to. So I'm not saying this with that moral intent. I'm just saying it's a biological fact. And it's something that has to be in there. I would like to know how this decision that affects my future, your future, the country's future is going to be made. And I personally think, from a political point of view, we'd better be discussing how it's going to be made in public. I don't mean me. I mean the president and all the rest of these people, all of it. This conversation needs to be had in advance publicly prior to whatever this criteria is, because if it's done unilaterally, there will not be an end to it. This is how pathological and utterly dysfunctional our political class is, and this is entirely the fault of the news media. That's just that simple. But these are the cards we got, and we have to play them. So has to be somebody has to be saying, here's how we're going to decide, folks. Hey, America, here's how it's going to go. When we reach 3 standard deviations on the back end of the curve, what? I don't care what the criteria is now. I want to know what the procedure will be. And people and the president and the opposition have to acknowledge this before it happens. Because if they don't, then it's going to be, he murdered those people. She murdered those people. She murdered the economy. He did. I'm so bloody sick of it. So that's the issue for today. What's the criteria? And how do we go back? But if we don't accept one thing in the beginning, one thing we got to understand right now, we have to understand this and we have to get this in our bones. It is not going to happen that we are going to play this out in terms of totally minimizing casualties at all other cost. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's worse if it happens. The idea that we're going to do every single thing possible to make sure that the fewest number of people die, meaning we're going to isolate for 18 months, is not going to happen. That would be far, 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 far worse than what we're going through right now. So if that's the case, then the factual result of that understanding that we are not going to go to 0 possible avoidable fatalities, because there'll be nothing to go back to. Now we have to say, okay. Now we have to say, if we are going to not sit on 18 months so that the laboratory view of the minimum casualties is met, because that's just not going to happen. If we're going to go back to work and back to what we do under whatever circumstances of mass immunity, put all that aside for a minute, the bottom line is, somewhere in here, we're going to have to say, this is the point at which we are now going to return to making the economy more important than flattening out the curve of this disease. And that means people are going to die. That's what it means. Get this through your heads. This is what we have to face, and no one's talking about it. You need to stand up in front of people and say this. We cannot do every single thing necessary to minimize fatalities, because that means an 18-month total lockdown of everybody. That's what we would have to do in order to save every single life we possibly could. And since we can't do that, that means that people are going to die who wouldn't have died if we had done that. You with me so far? I don't know what the number is. I don't know what the demographics are, but it's a logical, solid, logical conclusion. If the minimum casualty path, for the sake of the argument, is an 18-month isolation lockdown, if that's the minimum casualty path, then that path is locked. We're not going down that road. We can't. And if we don't go down the minimum casualty path, that means that there will be people who will have died because we didn't. And those people will be put on the feet of whoever wants to put them there for political and opportunistic reasons. And this is why we have to inoculate ourselves against this particular kind of meme. This particular kind of meme. The president let people go to work early and and 6,000 people died. That's a faulty statement because of the argument I'm making. He didn't let people go to work early. They didn't release it early. Whenever that time comes and however it comes, it's not a question of, let me rephrase that. Prepare yourself for the fact that no matter what actually gets done, there will be a factual and logical case to be made that people died who didn't have to die from the disease. It's got nothing to do with the economy and all those consequences. So, since people are already saying, well, the president dallied and that's why there are so many deaths and so on, so since this is the muck that's out there, by the way, the American people are dealing with this exceedingly well. It's the press and the people who are doing everything they can to find fault in the middle of the crisis that are destroying the morale of the country and all the rest of it. So, what we have to do is we have to absolutely understand and just get it out there in the beginning. We are going to lose people who could have otherwise been saved. So, now Lord Bio says that extending the easing the shelter orders before the virus is purged from the population will extend the length of the outbreak. When you say the virus is purged from the population, though, what does that mean? Is this ever going to be purged from the population? When you say purged from the population, surely you don't mean no cases ever. So really, we're talking about the same thing. You can't possibly say that we're going to wait until every single person, that there are no more active cases in the country. That it's just that doesn't seem right. You can use a term like this, that the virus is purged from the population, and that is, but still that is a statistical approximation. It is a epidemiological. God, I'm really losing it today. There has to be a standard. There has to be announced in advance. There has to be the understanding that the absolute minimum casualty pathway is not going to be taken. It's not. And it isn't for anything else either, by the way. And this is the other point that people need to be making, right? This is the point that people need to be making. When you say that you're going to do things and that people are going to die because we're not going to self-isolate for 18 months, somebody has to also step up and say, now, if that seems cold to you, then consider this. If we want to eliminate highway deaths in America, and the numbers in the thousands and thousands, then we simply stop driving. And that will do it. That will stop the excess deaths that are due to traffic accidents every year. We just stop driving. That's all you have to do. And those thousands of Americans that die every year won't die. This is how somebody's going to have to deal with this. It comes a point, like everything else, where it is a risk-reward calculation. And the problem politically, and I see this everywhere, the problem politically, and in terms of just the whole philosophy and the morality of it is, the problem is that people are talking about this as if this is the only thing that's killing people in the world. This is why this death count and all the rest of it, and past 30,000, 4,000 deaths, all of it. This is dangerously misleading. I'm not saying it's not a real threat, and I'm not saying it's not a dangerous threat. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that every single day we factor into our lives a certain number of deaths from heart disease, a certain number of deaths from obesity, diabetes, cancer, automobile accidents, murder, all of it. We accept that on a daily basis, and we go about our lives. This is going to have to get blended into that equation. And that means that more people will die than they did before. That's all there is to it. I don't, it doesn't make me happy about that news, but again, if you want to eliminate traffic accidents, stop driving. If you want to manage obesity related deaths, monitor everybody's food intake, put them in a line, chain them together, and feed them the same food pellet. Everybody will be at a perfect weight, and you don't have to worry about anything. Same thing goes for diabetes. Just ban sugar, all of it, all of it. This is the problem. And when I say lack of perspective, this is the lack of perspective. We do things every day that cause large numbers of people to die from heart disease. Much of that is preventable. Some of the cancers are preventable by behavior modification. Diabetes is very preventable by behavior modification. All of this stuff, all of these numbers could be reduced significantly if all we did was do nothing but worry about reducing these casualties to zero. And this is the conversation right there. We're going to have to figure out what price we're willing to pay for this. What number is going to be the balance between the two poles? And the two poles, again, is always helpful when you're dealing with something like this, which is on a spectrum. The two poles are, once we realize the disease is in the country, lock every single person into the house, they get their food delivered or whatever the case is for 18 months. That's the path of minimum casualties. The other pole is do absolutely nothing. You have this tremendous spike. People get it. It burns through the population. You take your losses, and it overloads the hospital systems and people who type 2 diabetes overloads the medical system. People die because they're having a heart attack or something. They can't get to the emergency room because it's clogged with COVID-19 people. So, minimum casualty path. There's the minimum interruption freedom path. And somewhere between these two is where we're going to be. And where is that line going to be drawn? And the final thing I'll say about this is this. The idea that we have a right to go through life without anything happening to us. We have a right to not die from disease. It's our right now, We have been so good at providing prosperity, so good at providing food, so good at providing medical care, that if you die before age 90, in bed, at home, surrounded by loving relatives, anything other than that is considered a terrible tragedy. And the world doesn't owe you that. The world does not owe you a comfortable death, slowly passing away in your sleep, at home, in bed, surrounded by loved ones. The world doesn't owe you that. We are all here, and we're all at risk, and any one of us can go at any time. And somewhere here, there needs to be an honest and forthright moral and philosophical discussion about how many casualties we're willing to accept for this. When you invade Normandy, people are going to die. Go ashore on Iwo Jima, people are going to die. You want to keep those numbers as low as possible, obviously, but that's a price you're going to have to pay if you're going to defeat these forces of fascism. And our ancestors understood this, and we don't seem to. We seem to be in a situation where no one's willing to accept the fact that this is not an ideological polar position. Everybody go back to work. Screw them. Nobody go back to work. Screw them. People are getting to these trenches, and it's just not that kind of a problem. It is a spectrum problem. It is a problem of degree. It is a problem of severity. It's a problem of all those things. There's no line, there's no markers, there's no digital points along this analog spectrum. Hound Dog says Trump will be blamed for casualties, whether great or small. Correct. Correct. So, it'd be nice if that weren't the case, but it is. And the political consequences are the political consequences and all of that. Downstream, when I say downstream, I mean a year from now, will our ability to defend ourselves against this kind of thing, including things like a second wave or a third wave, will we be better equipped for those in the future? You absolutely bet we will. We only took Pearl Harbor once. We only took 9/11 once. We knew those threats were out there. We just didn't believe it was going to happen until it happened. But after it happened, there's been no more Pearl Harbors. There's been no more sneak attacks on the U.S. military. It's inconceivable that people could go and have a traditional, conventional sneak attack on U.S. forces. They could have a sneak attack on cyber attack on U.S. forces. And we know that's a possibility that hasn't happened yet. EMP, all that stuff that's out there, we know it's out there. It hasn't happened yet. We don't take it seriously. But this has happened. And and since this has happened, we will put into place protection so that this doesn't happen again. But until then, we are going to have to realize that we are going to need to get to what is the philosophical and moral best possible case scenario, which is not a good scenario. There are no good choices here. When you're dealing with this issue, there are no good choices. They both suck. They're both poles suck. They're terrible. And that's the hand. That's what we got. We can cry about it, we can moan about it, we can blame people about it, but it doesn't matter. This is the hand that we're dealt. The hand that we're dealt is we have a disease out there with relatively low mortality compared to some of the other contenders in that Hall of Fame. Nevertheless, 1% of 300 million people is 3 million people. 0.1%, 300,000 people. But it's going to be people. That's the deal. It's here. So we need to be adult enough to accept it and state it and say, we are not going to take the path of minimum casualties, and we're not going to take the path of minimum economic damage. We're trying to find the sweet spot. We're trying to find the price point. That's what it comes down to, really, when you get right down to it. It is. It's a price point. What is the price point? If you're selling a product, say you're selling shoes, track shoes. If they cost you $20 to manufacture and you sell them for $25, you'll sell a lot more of them, but people would pay more than the $25. If they cost $20 to manufacture and you sell them for $2,000, you might find some people out there who are willing to pay that, but not as many. And clearly, what you find is that through market forces and all the rest of it, the price of a pair of Nikes finds itself where the maximum number of people are paying the highest price that the market will bear. You raise the price, total revenues go down. Lower the price, total revenues go down. That's the sweet spot. And that's where we need to be looking as a society. What's the best balance? What's the best path? And understand that that path is going to result in more people dying than would have if we had gone the minimum casualty route. But the minimum casualty route is not an option. It is a theoretical ideal. It's a theoretical goal. But you can't get there. And I don't think you should go. We haven't. It's already too late to go to the minimum economic damage model, which I don't think was morally the right choice to go that route. I think social distancing and quarantine is important, and I think we should wait till we get to the other side of the curve. I get all of that. I do. But one of the reasons I brought this title up in terms of immunity in the first place is we are still treating this like a binary thing. Work, no work. everybody goes to work or nobody goes to work. And that's not how the biology is playing out. And I think the best way to get to the sweet spot, minimum casualties, minimum economic damage, is to understand that some people can go to work when others can't. And in some places as well. And under certain conditions. All of this stuff. Who's having this conversation? Nobody. Nobody is having this conversation. So, we are, and that's it. And it is psychologically simple and easy and comfortable to retreat to one of those two poles. I'm a free market libertarian guy. I'm a caring, sensitive person. First of all, they're not mutually exclusive, and secondly, neither one of those is realistic. And neither one of them, by the way, is attainable. So that's where we are. We need to find where we're going to come in on the spectrum, find the pathway of minimum damage. But damage is going to be there. And to pretend that it's not, and to start blaming people for the damage, is not doing us any favors, and it's just making things worse. So that'll do it for this edition of the CoronaSphere Lounge, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. We've had a big surge in members, and if you think that means we're out of the woods, it doesn't, in terms of this business and all the rest of it. Times are tight out there. If you're struggling to take care of food, needless to say, let us know. But if you can help us, we could use it. Somebody needs to be having these conversations, and somebody needs to be having them ahead of the rest of the people, so that somebody has the drop on them when it comes time to take this into the public sphere. These kind of things need to be thought about. These kind of decisions, life and death decisions, future of the country decisions, require thought. And they don't just require thought, they require reflection, and they require contemplation, and they require seriousness and sobriety and courage. This kind of thinking requires courage, which means that this kind of thinking needs adults. Adults, presumably, are people who can look at life as it is and deal with the situation as it is, and not blame people, not play that game, and also not people who do not have the luxury, the mental luxury, to retreat to either one of these two poles and say, here I am, and you've murdered everybody, or here I am, and you've killed the economy. That's easy, but that's not the solution. And so there you go. Yeah, John Galt gets it. We now have to make the least bad choice. We have to make the least bad choice. And let's just get that understood right now. Anyway, thanks very much for joining us. This has been episode 15 of the CoronaSphere Lounge. We'll be back tomorrow for episode 16. What do I say other than, hang in there, America. As disturbing and as disgraceful as some of the high-level political things go, I still find myself several times a day extraordinarily proud of this country, extraordinarily proud of the people in this country. And when I see situations like the hoarding thing that upset me so much, I realize after reflection and contemplation, I realize that the reason it upsets me so much is because it is so rare. Is because it is so rare. So, hang in there, folks. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Take care. Hey. Yeah, people just mentioned. I saw it on the chat window that San Diego had a moderate earthquake. That information came to me about 10 seconds before the tremor did. Minor here in Los Angeles, just a little shake, but you could hear it. First, I thought people were walking down the hall or something, but no, definitely. Hey, earthquakes, fire, floods and disease, war, pestilence, tornado, and famine. Bring them all, bring what you got. We have not yet begun to fight. Anyway, a little mini earthquake addendum. Today's episode. We'll see you tomorrow.